Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to break down this really specific and, let's be honest, pretty controversial framework for attraction that claims to have cracked the code of human connection. We're going to pull it apart piece by piece to really understand how it's supposed to work. All right, let's dive in. The source material kicks things off with a huge promise, opening with this exact quote. Yeah, not exactly subtle, right? It's claiming to hold some kind of secret key to attraction, which sets the stage for a really provocative way of looking at things. And this is the big idea the whole thing is built on. The framework basically argues that how we normally think about attraction, as something we consciously choose, is just completely wrong. Instead, it claims attraction is something totally different. It's involuntary, like a reflex, an unconscious reaction that gets triggered by very specific signals. So the whole point isn't to, talk someone into liking you. It's just about sending out the right signals. Okay, so how are we going to tackle this? We're going to break it down into 4 key parts. First, the core theory, then the mindset you supposedly need, after that, the physical signals, and finally, the very specific way it says you have to structure your conversations. All right, first up, we have to get our heads around the foundational concept of the entire system. The source calls it the attraction radar. You can kind of think of this as the engine driving the whole thing. Everything else we're about to talk about is built right on top of this one idea. Now, before we get to the radar itself, we have to talk about how the source even defines attraction. See, it's not presented as some logical choice you make. It's described as this uncontrollable, subconscious, and emotional reaction to what a guy does. The big takeaway? In this model, attraction is not a choice. Okay, so this is where it gets interesting. The framework basically says the mind is split in 2. You've got the logical mind over here, the one that makes rational decisions, but the source argues it's got no power, really, because on the other side, you have this subconscious radar, and that's the one calling all the shots. And this radar, it's not just sitting there. The video argues it has one single biological mission: to find and select the right man. It's supposedly on 24/7, just constantly scanning the environment for signals. Which brings us to the million-dollar question, right? If this radar is making the final call based on signals, well, what are those signals? What's it actually looking for? What's the key thing it uses to judge a potential partner? And the answer, at least according to this framework, is surprisingly simple. The number one thing that radar is looking for is status. But not just any status, relative status. The framework argues that the radar is constantly asking this one simple question. Does this guy, through his behavior, see himself as being in a higher position than me? Okay, so if the name of the game is signaling higher status, how do you actually do that? That leads us right into part 2, the mindset. This is all about what's going on in your head before you even say a single word. And these 2 mental shifts, they're presented as totally non-negotiable. First, you have to, as the source puts it, de-pedestalize her. Basically, you have to internalize that she's just a human being, not some prize. And second, you have to actively adopt the perspective that you're in what it calls a higher position. It's all about that internal framing. So, once you've got that mindset locked in, we move on to the external signals. And that brings us to part 3. Body language. The cues it suggests, well, they're pretty counterintuitive, but they're all designed to project that higher position mindset we just talked about. So, first things first, the video says to forget all the usual advice you've probably heard. Stuff like sit up straight, keep your head up, don't put your hands in your pockets. All of that is dismissed as nonsense that supposedly doesn't help you. On this quote, this really sums up the whole idea. Basically, the argument is that high status comes from being totally, completely comfortable and just not caring what the other person thinks of you. In this view, the person who's most at ease is the one who's projecting higher status. Okay, so this philosophy boils down to 3 specific rules. Rule 1, lean away, not in. Leaning in supposedly shows too much interest. Rule 2, be ready to physically walk away, especially if she says something you don't like. And rule 3, which is kind of the main one, just be comfortable. Sit however you want, do whatever makes you feel at ease, and don't worry about how it looks. All right, so we've covered the internal mindset and the external body language. Now what? Now we get to part 4, the 50-30-20 conversation formula. And it's this super strict, almost mathematical structure for how every single interaction is supposed to go. So here's how it breaks down. 50% of the conversation has to be about her. 30% is about the environment, or just random stuff. And only 20%, the smallest chunk, is about you. The idea here is that the person who's always talking about themselves is the one trying to get approval. But it's not just about the percentages. There are specific rules for each part. When you're in that 50% chunk about her, you're supposed to listen like a therapist, get deep into her life and her dreams. For the 30% about the environment, the rule is be spontaneous, don't be serious. And for that really important 20% about you, the rules are super clear. Don't ever try to seem amazing. In fact, make fun of yourself. Be mysterious. Don't give too much away. And that brings us to the final piece of the puzzle. You've got the mindset, the body language, the conversation formula. It feels like you've got the whole system, right? But then the source throws in this one last huge challenge. It calls them tests. The theory goes like this. Once her radar picks up that you might be the right guy, it doesn't just take your word for it. Nope. It's supposedly gonna subconsciously push her to test you, to make sure your signals are for real. So what's the point of these tests? It's all about poking holes in your whole vibe to see if you're actually the real deal or if you're just putting on a show to impress her. And listen, the stakes here are crazy high. The video claims that if you fail just one of these tests, you'll lose your cool, it'll show that your whole act isn't genuine, and bam, the whole thing just falls apart. Instantly. And this is the massive cliffhanger the source material leaves us on. It gives you this whole framework designed to project this, rock-solid value. And then it tells you that the whole point is for it to be tested and shaken, which leaves us with this huge unanswered question. What does happen when a system that's all about performance finally gets put to the test?